I still remember the smell before I remember the words. November rain on the window roast chicken cooling on the counter, the hum of my mother's old ceiling fan. My family's house in Alexandria always looked the same no matter how many years I'd been away. Same beige curtains, same oak table polished until it shined, same framed photo of my sister in her white graduation dress, smiling like she owned the world. They said this dinner was to welcome me home. I believed them until the laughter started. My sister raised her glass and tilted her head toward me. She had that look that always meant trouble, the one she used before every performance. "So, Captain Ward," she said with a grin that wasn't really a grin, "where's your medal?" "Oh, right, you don't have one." The clink of her glass hit the silence like a spark. My mother's laugh came first high and shaky. My father followed a dry chuckle as if agreeing was easier than defending me. The sound felt heavier than any explosion I had ever heard in uniform. I stared at them, at their smiles, at the easy way they found humor in what they didn't understand. I had faced interrogations overseas that were kinder than that moment. My fork stayed mid-air. My pulse didn't rise. The years in intelligence had trained me to keep a neutral face to measure reactions before striking back. So I did what I always did best. I stayed quiet. Alyssa's eyes glittered across the table. "Come on, sis. You've been serving 12 years. You'd think they'd pin something shiny on you by now." I felt my throat tighten. "Maybe they give medals for what the public can see," I said softly. "Not for what they can't." My father leaned back. "Don't start talking secrets again, Elise. We're just proud of you." "Lighten up." Proud. That word burned. They used it the way civilians use sympathy, a bandage for what they never cared to understand. My mother poured more wine, pretending to smooth the tension, but I saw the smirk that slipped before her next sip. To them, it was a joke. To me, it was years of silence missions that would never be written down, lives protected that no one would ever thank me for. I wanted to tell them that some medals don't come in boxes, that sometimes the highest honor is surviving to the next sunrise. But I didn't. I just watched the condensation drip down my glass and said nothing. The clock on the wall ticked louder than usual. Alyssa looked pleased. She liked winning. She liked being the center. "You know, she said it's okay. Not everyone gets recognized. Some people are just support roles." My jaw tightened. She wouldn't know the weight of command the nights when decisions measured in seconds decided whether people lived or didn't. She wouldn't know the face of the man I pulled from rubble 2 years ago. The dust that clung to my skin for days after, or the silence that followed when the commendations were given to someone else. That wasn't jealousy. That was protocol. Intelligence meant invisible. I had accepted that. What I hadn't accepted was being mocked for it. I looked at my sister, then really looked at her, the designer dress, the perfect hair, the confidence built on likes and filters. I thought of how many times I had wired money to cover her late rent, her broken car, her impulsive business investments. I thought of the mortgage payments I had made so my parents could keep this very house. And now they laughed at me in it. I set my glass down. "You're right," I said quietly. "I don't have a medal." They all stopped. My tone was calm, too calm. "But I do have records. Maybe one day you'll read them." My father frowned. "Elise, we're just joking." "I know," I said. "That's what makes it worse." The room chilled. Even the ceiling fan seemed to slow. Alyssa shifted in her seat, uncomfortable for the first time. I had seen that same look on people when they realized they had underestimated the wrong person. My mother tried to change the subject, talking about recipes, about the weather. Anything to erase the tension she had helped create. But the air was already poisoned. The warmth of home was gone. I saw it clearly then. I wasn't their daughter at this table. I was a mirror reflecting everything they refused to face about themselves. They needed to mock me because acknowledging what I represented would mean confronting their own failures. My father's eyes dropped. My mother filled her glass again. Alyssa reached for her phone, scrolling as if she hadn't just thrown a grenade across the table. I stood up slowly. "Thank you for dinner," I said. "Next time don't cook for me. I'll bring the truth instead." My sister laughed again, but softer this time. She didn't know yet that her words had started something. that the silence I left behind would echo longer than any argument. As I walked out into the rain, I felt the cold soak through my uniform jacket. It grounded me. Out there, storms were simple. At home, they were dressed as family. That was the night I realized I wasn't part of them. I was their target. 2 years before that dinner, I was standing under a sky that smelled like metal and dust. Fort Bragg 2020. The kind of morning where the fog sits low over the training field and everything feels half forgotten. My unit had just come back from Syria, a classified operation that would never make headlines or family newsletters. We returned in silence, no cameras, no applause, just the sound of boots scraping asphalt and the hiss of bus brakes as we unloaded. A week later, the medals were handed out. Bronze stars, ribbons, commendations, polished words for public ceremony. I stood in the back of the room, hands folded behind my back, my name never called. Not because I failed, but because my file wasn't for public eyes. The mission was sealed, the records redacted, my contribution buried under black ink and national security. In intelligence, silence was your medal. We saved lives, and the price was anonymity. Most people will never understand that kind of pride, the quiet kind that doesn't sparkle on a uniform. My parents certainly didn't. When I flew home that December, they had decorated the living room with a banner that said, "Welcome back, Captain." It was the same banner they'd used when my father retired from the Navy 20 years earlier. My mother cried when she saw me, then immediately asked, "So what did they give you, a medal, right?" I told her no, the operation was classified. She blinked, confused. "But you did something important, didn't you?" "Yes," I said. "Then why can't they give you something to show it? Because that's not how it works." She frowned, and I could see the disappointment flicker behind her smile. My father leaned forward, beer in hand. "You've been at this for over a decade. At some point, you should have something tangible to show. That's how the world works, Elise." I wanted to tell him the world he knew ran on recognition, but the one I served in ran on silence. Instead, I just nodded. He'd been Navy, not Intel. He thrived on ceremony ranks, the kind of victories people could toast at dinner tables. I lived in the shadows of those celebrations, the ghost who gathered the intel that made their victories possible. I didn't resent it until that night in 2020, when I realized that to my family, the unseen didn't count. They didn't know the heat of an overseas compound at midnight, or the feeling of tracing a signal that led to the rescue of 30 hostages. They didn't know what it meant to operate under rules that demanded invisibility. You don't brag when your silence protects others. You just keep going. I had gotten used to living like that, compartmentalized, controlled. But my family wasn't built for quiet integrity. They were loud, needy, always measuring worth by visibility. Alyssa was the loudest of them all. 4 years younger, social media in her blood, Atlanta-based influencer with a love for designer clothes and short-lived sponsorships. Her life was a highlight reel. Mine was a redacted document. When she wasn't posting, she was asking for help. "Hey sis, my car broke down again. Hey sis, I'm short on rent. Hey sis, I'll pay you back next month, promise." She never did. I told myself it was okay, because family helps family. That's what Mom said whenever I hesitated. "You're the stable one, Elise. You have the good job." My paycheck went to more than just my bills. It went to theirs, my mother's medication, my father's consulting gaps, Alyssa's impulsive purchases. Each wire transfer was a small erosion of my boundaries, but I rationalized it. I was trained to fix problems quietly, efficiently. It was second nature to patch things up without drawing attention. I didn't realize then that I had become their invisible safety net, just like in the field, except this time no one would thank me for it. I remember one night on base sitting in the empty mess hall. David Lorne, my commanding officer, poured me coffee. "You're too loyal, Ward," he said. "That's not a bad thing, but it'll bleed you dry if you're not careful." I laughed it off. "It's not loyalty, it's duty." He shook his head. "They're not the same. Loyalty you choose. Duty chooses you." I didn't understand what he meant until years later, staring across the dinner table at faces that only saw what I hadn't achieved. I used to think my silence was strength. Now I saw how easily it could be mistaken for emptiness. After the Syria mission, I went months without talking about it. The confidentiality was one reason, but the bigger one was the emptiness of explaining something sacred to people who'd never understand. How do you tell your sister that you watched a city burn and called it stabilization? How do you tell your parents that you found peace not in medals, but in the moments when chaos stopped for 5 seconds and someone got to go home alive? You don't. You just nod and smile when they ask about promotions, medals, or when you'll finally settle down. I sent them money every month. I told myself it was gratitude that I was repaying their sacrifices. In truth, it was guilt. The same guilt my mother fed me in small doses since I was old enough to sign checks. I thought that if I kept giving one day, they'd see me not as the quiet one, not as the fallback daughter, but as the person who held the line when no one else could. I was wrong. By 2021, the wire transfers became automatic, the calls from home predictable. We're a little behind. Your sister's trying to get back on her feet. Just this once. Always just this once. And then the laughter came in 2023. The metal joke that wasn't a joke. I guess they finally said out loud what they'd always thought invisible effort doesn't count. I thought about that night often. The silence after the joke felt heavier than the silence after any mission. One was chosen. The other was imposed. And for the first time, I started to wonder which one would break me first. Coming home was supposed to feel like peace, but it didn't. It felt like standing in a room where everyone spoke a language I used to know but no longer understood. After leaving Fort Bragg, I moved into a one-bedroom apartment in Alexandria, Virginia, 10 miles from the Pentagon, but it might as well have been another planet. My new job at Rayfield Analytics looked perfect on paper. Defense Contractor Analyst, the title said. It paid well, came with security clearance, and gave me a desk with a view of the Potomac. My mother told everyone her daughter worked for the government. My father liked to brag that I ran data for the Pentagon. Neither was true. I analyzed threat patterns for private clients, companies that built the technology the government bought. It was a different kind of battlefield one with conference rooms instead of command tents, algorithms instead of targets. But war has a way of teaching your body to expect noise. The first few weeks, the quiet in my apartment made me restless. I kept waking at 300 expecting briefing calls that never came. I'd sit on the edge of my bed, staring at the dark window, listening for a sound that didn't exist. The hardest part wasn't what I'd seen overseas. It was what came after the stillness, the polite normalcy of people who'd never had to be afraid. At Rayfield, my coworkers talked about yoga retreats and mortgage rates. I smiled when they asked about my transition. They wanted stories but not the truth. The truth was that my mind still mapped every exit, every sound. I still walked into rooms scanning for risk. I couldn't unlearn what 12 years of military intelligence had wired into me. In uniform, that vigilance kept me alive. In civilian life, it made me look paranoid, so I hid it. I learned to laugh at the right times to keep my tone even when someone dropped a file behind me and I nearly flinched. I learned to wear calm like armor. My therapist at Fort Belvoir once called it functional hypervigilance. I called it surviving the suburbs. Every Sunday, my mother insisted on family dinner. We're trying to reconnect, she'd say. You've been gone too long. I wanted to believe her. I really did. I drove an hour south to Arlington each week, bringing wine or dessert, pretending the drive wasn't a countdown to disappointment. Their house hadn't changed. Same pictures, same smells, same voices talking over each other. My father asked about work. My mother asked about my love life. Alyssa talked about followers and brand deals, how content creation was harder than people think. I listened. I smiled. I told myself it was family. But every time I left, something felt off, like an echo of the old battlefield tension hiding under laughter. At first, I thought it was me, that maybe I was the one who couldn't adjust, that maybe military life had made me too rigid, too guarded. Then one night, I stopped by the kitchen to grab a glass of water and heard them talking. My father's voice was low. She's wound tight, Linda. She doesn't talk like normal people anymore. My mother sighed. She's always been intense. At least Alyssa's easier to be around. Alyssa laughed softly. She's like a machine. No fun, no warmth. Probably why she's still single. The words hit harder than they should have. I stood there silent, water glass in hand, the sound of my sister's laughter cutting sharper than gunfire ever had. For years, I'd believed they cared about me in their own way, that their distance was just how they loved, quietly, awkwardly. But that night I understood it wasn't love. It was convenience. I was useful when they needed help. I was interesting when they could brag about me. But beyond that, I was an obligation. That realization didn't make me angry. It just emptied me out. Back at my apartment, I sat at my desk and opened my laptop. My inbox was full work reports, encrypted files, budget approvals. I should have felt proud. I had stability, security, independence. Yet I felt nothing but exhaustion. I'd spent my whole adult life serving systems first, the Army, then my family, now a corporation that valued output more than people. The uniform was gone, but the duty remained. The next morning at the Rayfield office, a coworker named Sam asked if I wanted to grab lunch. "You're too quiet, Ward," he said. "You should get out more." I smiled. "Quiet's safer." He laughed like I was joking. I wasn't. That afternoon during a meeting, my supervisor presented my analysis as his own. I didn't correct him. Old habits die hard. Recognition still wasn't part of the job. That night, my mother called again. "Dinner this weekend?" "Sweetheart," I almost said no. Almost. But the thought of disappointing her still carried the same weight it did when I was 16. "Sure," I said. "What time?" "6," she said cheerfully. "We'll make your favorite. And bring that nice red wine again." I hung up and stared at my reflection in the dark window. The city lights behind me looked like stars scattered across the water, distant and unreachable. I didn't know when it had happened, but somewhere along the way home had stopped being a place and turned into an obligation. The truth is, I didn't belong anywhere anymore, not in the Army, not in this city, not even at my own family's table. Maybe that's what they meant when they said returning to normal. You come back, but you're never really back. You blend in just enough for people to stop asking questions. You laugh at their jokes. You act like the quiet doesn't bother you. You pretend you're fine. Some nights I'd drive past Fort Belvoir just to watch the gates, the floodlights tracing over the fences. It was the only place where my heartbeat matched the rhythm of the world around me. Everything outside that fence felt foreign. Everything inside felt like purpose. Maybe that's what I missed most, purpose. The sense that every action meant something. At home, everything just lingered. If you've ever come home and felt like you didn't belong anymore, tell me where you're listening from. The following Sunday, I drove to my parents' house in Arlington, the same split-level suburban home that had hosted every family gathering since I was a child. The neighborhood was quiet, the kind of place where people still trimmed their lawns every Saturday and waved at each other just to prove they were doing fine. Through the window, I could already see the warm yellow light of the dining room spilling onto the porch. I parked, straightened my jacket, and told myself this time would be different. Inside, the air smelled like roasted chicken and cheap red wine. My mother moved between the stove and the counter with her usual urgency, as if cooking were the only way she knew to maintain control. My father sat at the head of the table, scrolling through his phone, half watching a muted news channel on the wall-mounted TV. Alyssa was already there, glowing with her usual performative cheer. She looked like she belonged in a magazine spread, white blouse, gold earrings, a subtle shimmer that probably came from some sponsored beauty product. "Hey, sis," she chirped. "Glad you could make it on time. We were just talking about my new project." I hung my coat, forced a smile. "Another brand deal. Life coaching," she said proudly. "I'm helping women step into their power. You'd love it." My father chuckled. "Your sister's doing great, Elise. Maybe you should relax and find balance." I met his eyes briefly. Balance. That word sounded foreign coming from a man who'd spent half his life yelling at recruits to toughen up. "Balance is overrated," I said lightly. "Discipline is survival." He waved a hand dismissively. "Always so intense." My mother set down a bowl of mashed potatoes, smiling like she was the glue holding us all together. "It's just different worlds, dear. Alyssa helps people find happiness, and you keep people safe." The way she said it made it sound like a hobby, not a profession. Alyssa poured herself wine. "Speaking of safe, I still don't understand what exactly you do, Elise. Something with computers, right? You track people or something? Something like that. So, do you actually see combat?" she pressed. "Not directly." She laughed, a short, amused sound. "So it's more like sitting behind a screen, right?" I felt my jaw tighten but kept my tone even. Sometimes sitting behind a screen saves lives. Sure, she said, swirling her wine. But it's not really the same as action. My father interjected. Hey, don't tease your sister. She's done her part. But he was smiling when he said it, not defending, just participating in the rhythm of mockery disguised as affection. Alyssa leaned back, satisfied with the attention. I just think it's funny. I mean, 12 years in the Army and not a single medal to show for it. You'd think they'd at least give you a participation trophy. The words hung in the air, bright and cruel. The laughter that followed wasn't loud, but it spread quickly. My mother's soft giggle, my father's quiet snort. Even the wine glasses seemed to shimmer in agreement. I sat perfectly still. My pulse didn't spike. My training kicked in. In intelligence control was your weapon. I looked at my sister, really looked, and saw it the smugness of someone who had never been told no. She thrived on reaction. I refused to give her one. Where's your medal? She asked again, smiling wider now. Oh, right. You don't have one. My voice came out calm, measured. I don't need one to know what I've done. The table fell briefly silent. Then Alyssa laughed again, high and sharp like a knife against glass. That's the thing about you, Elise. Everything's always a secret, isn't it? It's hard to celebrate someone who never talks about what they actually do. Maybe because some things aren't meant for dinner conversation, I said. My father shifted in his seat. Let's not turn this into one of your operations, Elise. We're just having fun. Fun? That word grated against my skin. Fun was a luxury for people who'd never watched the consequences of failure in real time. I'd spent years dissecting data that determined who lived and who didn't. To them, it was all abstract. To me, it was faces. I looked at the food I'd lost my appetite for. The chicken, the potatoes, the wine, all symbols of normal life I couldn't seem to touch without feeling foreign. You know, Alyssa continued tapping her glass with her ring. You might be happier if you just loosened up. Maybe find someone, start a family. You've done the soldier thing. Isn't it time to be normal? My mother murmured. She's right, honey. You deserve happiness too. I exhaled slowly. I'd learned to de-escalate insurgents with less patience than this. Noted, I said finally, my tone flat and cold. The word landed heavier than I intended. The air in the room shifted, the laughter trailing off. Alyssa blinked, realizing too late that the game had changed. My father cleared his throat, pretending to check his watch. My mother reached for the wine again, but her hands trembled slightly. I could feel the silence pressing against the walls, the kind of silence that follows a miscalculated joke. It was a small victory, but it wasn't satisfying. It felt like staring across enemy lines after the first shot too late to retreat too early to celebrate. I stood and began gathering plates, my movements precise. You don't have to do that, my mother said quickly. I know. I stacked another plate. But I will. No one stopped me. When the kitchen faucet hissed and the water filled the sink, I let the noise drown their awkward murmurs. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw Alyssa watching me, uneasy now, trying to read my face. She wouldn't find anything. I'd perfected the art of unreadable. As I rinsed a glass, I caught my reflection in the window, the uniform gone, but the soldier still there. I realized then that the battlefield hadn't ended overseas. It had just changed coordinates. Some wars you fight with weapons, others with silence. That night, I drove home in the dark, the taste of cheap wine still bitter on my tongue. The road was empty, the city lights distant. I told myself I was fine. I'd been trained to be fine. But deep down, I knew something had cracked. I had spent years fighting for a country that valued honor, and now I was fighting for a family that laughed at it. And this time, I didn't know which was harder. The rain started halfway through the drive, thin at first, then heavy enough to smear the city lights into ribbons across my windshield. The roads between Arlington and Alexandria were mostly empty, slick with November water, the kind that glowed red every time the traffic lights hit the puddles just right. I drove with one hand on the wheel, the other resting against my knee jaw, tight mind louder than the rain. They've mistaken silence for weakness. That sentence looped in my head with every mile. I'd spent years mastering restraint using calm as my weapon, but tonight it felt like a cage. The laughter from dinner echoed in fragments, sharp and unshakable. My sister's voice, my father's chuckle, my mother's fragile smile, pretending it was all harmless fun. They didn't know that some words leave bruises you can't see. The rain intensified the wipers thudding in rhythm with my thoughts. Every flash of red light reflected off the mirror like a warning flare. For a moment, I wasn't on I-395. I was back in Syria 2 years earlier, the smell of burning sand and diesel thick in the air. The sky there never went fully dark. Even at midnight, the horizon glowed with the echo of distant explosions. We were stationed near Raqqa, running an intelligence extraction on a local network gone rogue. What was supposed to be a quiet retrieval turned into chaos when the convoy hit an unmarked mine. The blast threw everything sideways, dust metal screams. I remember dragging Sergeant Mark Lee out from behind the wreckage, his leg bleeding, his voice shaking as he tried to laugh it off. "I'm fine, Captain," he said, though his uniform told a different story. I pressed a field dressing against his wound, hands steady even as my ears rang. "No, you're not," I said. "But you will be." We waited for evac pinned between radio silence and the sound of enemy pickup trucks circling somewhere beyond the dunes. I kept my weapon ready, my mind split between triage and tactics. Hours later, we made it back to base. No one outside that circle ever knew how close we came to losing 3 men that night. The official report said minimal engagement. The reality was a miracle. I risked my life to protect men who never knew my name, and tonight my own family mocked me for it. That contrast hit hard. I tightened my grip on the steering wheel, watching the road blur under the downpour. In the field, I had clarity. Every decision mattered. Every order had weight. Back home, everything was murky, wrapped in politeness and false smiles. People fought with words that cut deeper than bullets. Civilians would never understand that silence isn't emptiness, it's control. My family had mistaken that control for detachment, for coldness. They thought my calm meant I didn't care. In truth, it was the only way I knew to keep from breaking. I turned the radio on for background noise, but the static made it worse. The voice of some late-night host filled the cabin, talking about gratitude and family dinners. The irony so sharp I almost laughed. I turned it off again. The quiet came rushing back, full and heavy. My reflection in the windshield looked foreign. The same eyes, the same posture, but something was missing, a softness I used to have before the army taught me to see the world as patterns and threats. I wondered when exactly I'd lost it when laughter had started to sound like warning signals. By the time I reached the Key Bridge, the rain had slowed to a drizzle. The city skyline shimmered in the distance, glass towers standing indifferent against the storm. I pulled into the parking lot of my apartment complex, the streetlights flickering in the puddles. When I cut the engine, the silence felt deafening. I sat there for a moment, staring at my hands. The skin around my knuckles was rougher than it should be for someone who worked behind a computer now. I flexed my fingers, remembering the weight of the field kit, the drag of Mark's body through sand, the grit between my teeth. Those memories used to haunt me. Now they grounded me. They reminded me that I'd earned every scar the quiet way. Inside my apartment, I left the lights off. The city outside provided enough glow through the blinds. I hung my jacket, kicked off my boots, and sank into the chair by the window. The hum of the fridge, the drip of rain outside, the faint vibration from a passing metro. It was all background noise, the kind that filled the void but didn't fix it. I thought about calling someone, maybe an old teammate, but we'd all scattered after Syria. The few who still reached out did so on birthdays or anniversaries, the safe days. We all knew better than to reopen wounds that hadn't really closed. I opened my laptop instead, intending to drown myself in work reports, but before the screen even loaded, my email notification pinged. The sender's name froze me mid-breath. Lieutenant Colonel David Lorne. Subject line: "We need to talk." My stomach tightened. It had been over a year since I'd heard from him the last message, a brief "proud of you, Ward," after I left the service. I clicked the message open. There wasn't much inside, just a single line. "Something's come up. Classified. Call me first thing." No explanation. No context. Just urgency. I leaned back, staring at the words. The rain outside started again, light and rhythmic like a heartbeat. Part of me wanted to ignore it. I had built a new life, quiet and predictable one that didn't involve encrypted briefings or moral gray zones. But another part of me, the part that still measured silence like coordinates, felt that familiar pull. Whatever this was, it wasn't random. I closed the laptop, the faint glow of the screen fading from my face. The city lights flickered through the blinds, casting lines across the floor like bars of a cage. I sat there unmoving until the clock hit midnight. The email replayed in my mind. "We need to talk." I didn't know what it meant yet, but something told me that whatever peace I'd been pretending to have just ended with those 4 words. The call came early the next morning before the sun reached over the rooftops of Alexandria. My phone vibrated across the nightstand, and when I saw the name flash on the screen, Lieutenant Colonel David Lorne, I already knew sleep was over. "Captain Ward," he said, voice as steady as ever. It was strange hearing that title again. I hadn't used it in months. "Morning, sir," I answered, forcing my voice to wake up. "Didn't expect to hear from you." "Something's come up," he said. "You still at Rayfield Analytics?" "Yeah." "Then listen closely. Someone's leaking field data to civilian firms. We think it's internal." I sat up, the words slicing through the last trace of sleep. "You mean classified data highly?" "Tactical debriefs, satellite logs, encrypted movement files. It's showing up in defense proposals from private contractors, yours included." I turned toward the window. The city outside looked deceptively calm, commuters' buses, morning rain. Nothing in sight hinted that the invisible machinery of national security might be cracking. "You think someone at Rayfield is selling intel?" "We can't confirm yet," he said, "but the metadata trail points toward your network. You still have access to those shared servers, right?" "Yes." "Then you're in the best position to notice anomalies. Quietly." I exhaled, pressing my thumb against my temple. "So, you're asking me to investigate my own employer?" "I'm asking you to observe. You know how to disappear in plain sight." He paused, his tone softening. "Ward, I wouldn't call if it wasn't serious." "Understood." When the call ended, I sat for a long minute staring at the reflection of my face in the glass. That part of my life was supposed to be over. I'd traded the field for an office danger for stability. But the past has a way of circling back, especially when you least want it to. By noon, I was back at Rayfield's headquarters, a sleek building of glass and steel off Duke Street. Inside, everything smelled of coffee and ambition. People moved fast, carrying laptops and urgency-chasing deadlines that meant bonuses, not safety. I logged into my system and pulled access records. Nothing obvious stood out, but one pattern caught my eye. Someone had been downloading encrypted archives late at night using a temporary admin code. The digital fingerprint was masked, but the timestamps lined up with internal VPNs. Whoever it was knew what they were doing. My inbox pinged again, but not from David this time, from my mother. "Can you transfer $5,000? Alyssa's car got repossessed. She needs help getting it back." I stared at the message, blinking once, twice. 5,000. The number barely registered anymore, not after years of transfers. My stomach tightened. The timing couldn't have been worse. I typed back a simple line, "I can't." The reply came fast. "What do you mean you can't? You always help. She's your sister." I took a breath, feeling the familiar pressure behind my ribs, the guilt they knew how to trigger so well. "I'm done funding irresponsibility." There was a pause, then another bubble of text appeared. "Family helps family." I stared at those words longer than I should have. Once they had sounded noble. Now they just sounded like manipulation. "Then maybe you should remind Alyssa that family doesn't mock service," I typed and hit send before I could overthink it. The dots on the screen pulsed for a moment, then disappeared. No reply. The silence that followed was worse than an argument. I set my phone down and leaned back in my chair. The hum of fluorescent lights filled the office, the sound sterile and constant. I thought of David's voice on the phone, calm but edged with warning. Someone inside was leaking secrets. And here I was, still being drained by the same people who claimed to love me. Maybe that was the real pattern betrayal from within. By afternoon, I had traced the suspicious logins to a shared server used by 3 departments. One belonged to a senior consultant, one to an external liaison, and one to our strategic partnerships division. Ironically, the same department that handled government contracts. I downloaded the access logs onto a flash drive, encrypted them, and locked the drive in my bag. The deeper I looked, the clearer it became that this wasn't random. The data being moved matched the type David mentioned: field reports, tactical assessments, even fragments of mission code words. Someone was selling defense information dressed up as market analytics, and Rayfield's leadership either didn't know or didn't care. At 5, my boss, Mr. Keaton, stopped by my desk. "Ward, good work on that security audit. We'll review it Monday." His tone was casual, too casual. My screen still showed the folder labeled Confidential Transfer Logs. I minimized it quickly. "Thank you, sir," I said, keeping my face neutral. He smiled and walked off. I watched him leave the back of his tailored suit sharp against the hallway lights. Something about the way he moved, unhurried, confident, made my gut twist. He wasn't worried. Either he knew nothing or he knew everything. That night, back in my apartment, the phone buzzed again. This time, it was Alyssa. No greeting. Just, "Thanks for nothing." I almost didn't reply, but I typed anyway. "Grow up, Alyssa." Then, after a beat, another line. "I'm not your bank." She read it instantly. No answer. The rain had returned, tapping against the window in steady rhythm. I stared out at the streetlights and thought about the absurd symmetry of it all. My sister draining me for comfort, my company draining my country for profit, both hiding behind the same excuse. It's just business. It's just family. Maybe that was the real difference between the battlefield and civilian life. Out there, you saw betrayal coming. Here, it smiled at you and called you dear. I closed my laptop, poured a glass of water, and sat by the window until the city blurred. David's words replayed in my mind. "You know how to disappear in plain sight." I did. I also knew how to hunt quietly. Whatever this leak was, I'd find it. But first, I'd draw a different line, the one between duty and damage. I wasn't going to be their safety net anymore, not at home, not at work. Some debts can't be repaid. Some ties shouldn't be repaired. Would you have cut them off too, or kept paying out of guilt? The next week unfolded like a slow, unraveling thread, each day tighter, each call sharper. By Tuesday, my phone wouldn't stop buzzing. Missed calls, voicemails, messages stacked like debris. Mom, Dad, Alyssa. The same cycle: pleading guilt, anger, silence, repeat. I didn't answer any of them. Every time the screen lit up, I just watched their names fade out again, the light vanishing into the dark. On Thursday morning, I finally listened to one. My mother's voice came through, soft but shaking. "Elise, we just need a little help this month. The mortgage company's being impossible. You don't want to see us lose the house, do you? Please, sweetheart." The way she said sweetheart felt rehearsed, like a script she'd perfected over years of emergencies. I deleted it without saving. I had already made my decision, but that night, as I checked my email, something odd appeared. A notification from an old government-linked account, the one tied to my years of service. It hadn't been active since I left the Army. The subject line read, "Update dependent status change confirmed." I frowned. That wasn't possible. I hadn't added any dependents, not since my discharge. I opened the message, scanning line by line until my breath caught halfway down. It listed my mother's name, Linda Ward, as the applicant under Spouse of Service Member Retired Dependent Verification. The form was dated 2 weeks ago, and at the bottom beneath my digital signature was a signature I hadn't written. For a moment, I just stared at it. Then my pulse started to climb. It wasn't just a misunderstanding, it was fraud. She'd used my old military ID number to apply for a dependent housing loan, one reserved for active or retired personnel. The total $42,000. Approved. My hands trembled, not from shock, but from the quiet, calculated anger that came when you realized someone had crossed a line they couldn't uncross. I checked the metadata location tag, Tacoma, Washington, the same town they lived in. I sat there, the hum of my laptop loud in the silence, and whispered to myself, "You really did it, Mom." I didn't call. I didn't text. I did what I was trained to do. I documented everything. Screenshots, metadata, timestamps. Then I stored it on an encrypted drive labeled simply Homefront. It was almost mechanical. Years of intelligence work had taught me how to separate emotion from evidence. Still, that didn't stop the ache in my chest when I thought about it how low they must have sunk to use my name for money. The next morning at Rayfield, my badge scanned red. System audit in progress, the monitor read. My boss, Mr. Keaton, waved me over. Ward, we've got a company-wide security review this week, he said. Routine compliance check, nothing to worry about. Routine wasn't a word I trusted. What triggered it, I asked. Corporate standard, he said too fast. You know how it is, Defense Department's tightening regulations. I nodded, keeping my expression flat. But inside, everything clicked into place. The timing, the classified data leak, David's warning. The audit wasn't random, it was reaction. Later that afternoon, while the IT team combed through our servers, I noticed Keaton spending an unusual amount of time near the conference room printer. When he left, I slipped by to refill my water bottle and glanced at the tray. Half a page stuck out still warm. I pulled it free. It was a financial statement, Rayfield's external consultant payments. My father's name was on the list, Thomas Ward Strategic Liaison Services retainer, $700 and $500 month. The world seemed to tilt. My father had told me for years he was consulting part-time waiting for projects. I'd believed him, but here it was proof. He was being paid by the same company now under investigation for leaking field data. Once I hunted enemies overseas, I murmured under my breath. Now I'm hunting betrayal at home. I folded the paper, slipped it into my bag, and forced my breathing steady. The rest of the day passed in slow-motion meetings, small talk, artificial smiles. By 5, I was drained. I walked out into this cold evening air, the weight of everything pressing on me, the fraud, the leaks, the lies. At a stoplight, I saw a reflection in a storefront window, the faint outline of a woman standing still while the world blurred around her. I almost didn't recognize her. The soldier in me still stood tall, but the daughter looked like she'd been hit. Back home, I sat by the window with the lights off. The city was quiet, except for the occasional siren far away. My phone buzzed again. Alyssa this time. Mom's upset. You could have just helped instead of making her cry. I didn't respond. Then another message came. You think you're better than us because of your stupid army job? My chest tightened. Not from hurt, just the final confirmation that the gap between us wasn't repairable anymore. I typed one line, better no. Just done. Then turned the phone face down. For a while, I sat in the silence trying to process the two halves of my life, colliding family and duty, both corrupted from within. In one world, secrets were currency. In the other, they were weapons. I thought about the dinner table, the laughter, the mockery, and now the signatures forged behind my back. All of it leading to this moment, a quiet war no one would see but me. Before bed, I opened the encrypted folder again and scrolled through the evidence. I wasn't sure what my next move would be, but I knew I wouldn't let this go. There were things I could forgive. This wasn't one of them. Sunday night arrived wrapped in cold air and false civility. The text from my mother had come that morning, short, almost polite. Come home. We need to talk. No fighting this time. There was no apology, no explanation, just expectation, the same tone she'd used my entire life when she assumed I'd show up regardless of how deep the wound went. I almost ignored it, but some instinct told me to go. If they wanted to talk, I'd give them truth, not compliance. The drive down to Arlington felt different this time. The same streets, same turns, but my mind was steel now, not sentiment. The last time I'd driven this route, I'd been the daughter trying to keep peace. Tonight, I was the investigator bringing evidence. When I parked outside the porch, light flickered like a dying signal. Inside the dining room looked exactly as it had that first night, the same wooden table, the same faint smell of roast chicken and candle wax. The only thing missing was warmth. The air buzzed with unspoken tension. My mother stood near the counter folding napkins that didn't need folding. My father sat at the head of the table, posture straight, jaw set. Alyssa leaned against the doorway, scrolling her phone, pretending she wasn't watching me. You came, my mother said quietly. We didn't think you would. I'm full of surprises, I said. My father gestured to the chair across from him. Sit. Let's settle this once and for all. I stayed standing. Settle what? This. Misunderstanding, he said, voice firm. Your mother explained what happened. There's no need to make a federal case out of paperwork confusion. Paperwork confusion. The phrase made my teeth clench. You mean fraud? I said, flatly. That's what the federal government calls it when someone forges a DoD identity. Alyssa sighed loudly. Here we go again. God, Elise, can't you stop treating everything like a mission? She just needed help. My mother flinched. Alyssa, please. I looked at her, then really looked. She was paler than I remembered, hair tied too neatly, eyes darting between me and Dad like she was waiting for someone to defuse a bomb. Mom, I said softly, why don't you tell me exactly what you did? I didn't do anything, she said quickly. I just filled out a form online. It said dependents of service members could apply for special loans. I thought since your father's retired and you served, you thought you could use my ID. I cut in. My federal ID. Without asking. Her voice wavered. It's not like that. I took a step forward, unzipping my bag. It's exactly like that. My father's tone turned sharp. Elise, don't you dare talk to your mother that way. She was trying to help this family. You've been distant for months, too good for us. Too proud pride, I said quietly. You think this is about pride? I opened my laptop and set it on the table. The glow from the screen cast pale light across their faces. I clicked the folder labeled Homefront and turned the screen toward them. Rows of evidence filled the screen, documents, timestamps, metadata. I tapped the touchpad once. The forged form appeared her name, my signature, the approval seal. Mom, I said evenly, you forged a federal document using my Department of Defense ID. Silence. Thick, suffocating. My mother's hand froze mid-air. Alyssa's phone screen dimmed. My father's eyes narrowed, his jaw tightening as if clenching could erase the truth on the screen. How dare you accuse your mother? He shouted, slamming his palm on the table. The sound cracked through the room. I didn't flinch. It's not an accusation, I said calmly. It's evidence. The quiet that followed was worse than shouting. The only sound was the faint hum of the refrigerator in the next room and the soft ticking of the wall clock every second punctuating their disbelief. Alyssa broke first. So what? It's just money. You have plenty, Elise. You could have helped instead of turning this into a crime scene. I turned toward her slowly. Do you know what happens to civilians who forge federal IDs? It's not a fine, Alyssa. It's prison, she scoffed. You wouldn't dare. You have no idea what I would or wouldn't do. My father stood halfway, pointing a finger toward me. We are your family. We built you. You wouldn't even have that uniform without us. I met his glare head on. You didn't build me, Dad. The Army did. You just benefited from it. His face reddened, veins rising at his temple. Watch your tone. I stayed perfectly still. I don't take orders anymore. Especially not from people who forged my name. The room went dead still again. My mother's voice trembled when she finally spoke. Elise, we didn't mean to hurt you. Things got tight and your father thought... My father thought what I asked. That fraud was easier than asking, that you could sign my name and I'd quietly clean it up like I always do. No one answered. The silence stretched until even breathing sounded loud. I looked at each of them in turn, Alyssa's fidgeting, my mother's tears welling, my father's fury simmering just below control. I want you to understand something, I said finally, voice steady. What you did isn't just betrayal, it's a federal offense. And I have to decide whether to report it. Alyssa's face drained of color. You wouldn't. Wouldn't I asked. You already decided what I was capable of the night you laughed at me. Maybe it's time you learn who I really am. My father's voice came out low, warning. You're bluffing. I closed the laptop. The sound of the lid snapping shut felt final, like a door locking. Then you won't mind if I make a few calls tomorrow. I picked up my bag. No one moved. My mother reached out, her voice breaking. Elise, please. We can fix this. I stopped at the doorway. You should have thought about fixing it before you forged my name. She started to cry quietly, but I couldn't let myself feel sympathy, not this time. I turned toward the table one last time. You wanted to talk? You just did. I hope you listened. Then I walked out, the sound of my boots echoing down the hall. Behind me, no one followed. The house, once full of noise, now felt like a tomb. Outside, the wind bit cold against my face. I took one long breath, steady and deliberate. I'd spent my life serving a code of honor others only pretended to understand. Tonight, that code wasn't about medals or loyalty. It was about lines and what happens when someone crosses them. The next night came colder than expected. I hadn't planned on going back, but Alyssa called not to apologize, but to demand. "You can't just leave things like that," she'd said. "Dad's furious. Mom's been crying all day. You need to come fix this. Fix this." That was the phrase that defined my entire life. I agreed to come only because I needed closure, not reconciliation. But deep down, I knew exactly how this would end. When I arrived, the front door was already cracked open. The same yellow light spilled from the dining room, casting warped shadows across the hall. My father's voice boomed from inside. "She's here," he announced as if calling a verdict. I stepped into the room. The air felt heavier this time. My mother sat at the table, her eyes red, a tissue clutched tight in her hand. Alyssa leaned against the counter, arms crossed defiant. My father stood near the head of the table, posture rigid, veins visible at his temple. "You called me," I said quietly. "So talk." My father didn't sit. "You've embarrassed this family enough, Elise," he said, voice sharp. "What were you thinking, threatening your mother like that? You could have destroyed everything." I kept my voice even. "I didn't threaten anyone. I showed the truth." Alyssa rolled her eyes. "You're obsessed with truth. Maybe if you spent less time acting like a soldier and more time acting like a daughter, things wouldn't have gotten this bad." "Acting like a daughter," I repeated. "You forged my name. You drained my bank account for years. You mocked my service in front of our parents. Tell me, Alyssa, what part of that looks like family to you?" Her expression hardened. "You think your uniform makes you better than us?" I met her stare. "No," I said slowly. "It just means I earned mine." The room went silent. My father's jaw clenched. My mother looked away. Alyssa's eyes flashed with something between rage and humiliation. "God, listen to yourself. You sound like a robot. You hide behind that uniform like it's armor, but it's pathetic. You're pathetic." I felt the words hit, but they didn't sink. There was a time when they might have, but not anymore. I'd spent too long building my composure to let her tear it down with childish spite. "Say whatever you need to feel big," I said calmly. "But that uniform is the reason you have the freedom to sit here and insult me." Alyssa scoffed. "Freedom? Spare me the patriot speech. You were never in combat. You sat behind a screen." My father's voice cut through hers. "Enough!" He slammed his hand on the table, silverware rattling. "This ends now. You will apologize to your mother for what I asked, for catching her crime." His face turned red. "For disrespect." I took a step closer. "Respect isn't blind obedience. You taught me that once, or did you forget?" He glared at me the same way he used to glare at recruits who questioned orders. For a moment, I saw the man I used to admire, the Navy officer who once told me honor mattered more than comfort. But that man was gone. In his place stood someone who'd traded integrity for control. My mother's voice trembled. "Elise, please. We're family. We can't keep doing this." I looked at her, my tone softening. "Family doesn't forge each other's names, Mom. They don't lie. They don't use guilt as currency. You didn't need my help. You wanted my silence." "Enough," my father snapped again, stepping toward me. His height cast a shadow across the table. "You will not talk to your mother like that in my house." "Then maybe," I said quietly, "it's time I stop calling it home." His hand moved before I saw it coming, a blur of motion, a sharp crack, the sting blooming across my cheek. The sound filled the room, echoing off the walls. My mother gasped. Alyssa froze. I didn't move. My head turned slightly from the force, but I didn't raise a hand, didn't speak for several seconds. My training kicked in, assess, contain, control. I looked back at him straight in the eye. My voice came out low, cold, unwavering. "If this were a battlefield, I said you'd have already lost." His hand dropped, the realization flickering across his face that I wasn't the same woman he'd been able to intimidate all my life. The silence that followed was absolute. Alyssa's mouth opened, but no words came out. My mother's tears slid silently down her face, and the ticking clock filled the air like a heartbeat. I stood there a moment longer, the taste of iron in my mouth, the weight of years pressing on my shoulders. Then I picked up my bag, slung it over my shoulder, and said, "You wanted me to fix this?" "Consider it fixed." My father didn't move. My mother whispered my name, but I didn't stop. I walked past Alyssa, who still stood frozen, her phone half raised as if she wanted to record something but couldn't bring herself to. At the door, I paused, turning just enough to see the reflection of the three of them in the dining room mirror, a family frozen in the moment of their own undoing. "You taught me to respect authority," I said quietly. "You just forgot that respect goes both ways." And then I left. Outside, the night was silent, the air crisp and cold. I walked down the steps, my boots echoing against the wet concrete. My hands trembled, but not from fear, from the restraint it took not to look back. The rain began again, soft at first, then harder, washing away the last traces of warmth. I got into my car, closed the door, and exhaled slowly. The faint reflection in the rearview mirror showed the red mark on my cheek. I touched it once, then let my hand drop. Some battles are fought in silence. Others are won by walking away. I started the engine. The headlights cut through the rain, illuminating the road ahead, empty, straight, and finally mine. Would you have walked away or fought back? The bruise along my jaw had faded by the time I drove to Fort Belvoir, but the anger hadn't. The base loomed against the gray Virginia sky, familiar yet distant, like a place from another life. I parked near the administrative wing and sat for a moment before getting out. The badge on my dashboard still bore my old title, Captain Elise Ward, U.S. Army Intelligence, a reminder of the discipline that built me, the same discipline my family had mistaken for coldness. Inside, the Department of Defense legal office smelled like paper and disinfectant. I gave my name to the clerk, and within minutes, a tall woman in uniform appeared from the hallway. "Captain Ward," she asked, even though I wasn't technically one anymore. "We received your request." Her nameplate read, Lieutenant Commander J. Holbrook. She led me into a narrow office lined with case files. "You're reporting a forged document." "Yes," I said, setting down my folder. "Federal loan application filed under my DoD identification number. Signature falsified. I have metadata timestamps and the IP address." She scanned the papers quickly, her expression tightening. "This was filed under a dependent housing grant. That's military-only access. Whoever did this had prior system familiarity." "She did," I said. "My mother." Holbrook paused. "Your mother?" "She was married to a Navy veteran," I explained. "She knows enough to navigate the system." The officer studied me for a long moment, professional but cautious. "You understand the gravity of this, Captain. Filing this report will trigger an official fraud inquiry. If confirmed, your parents could face federal charges." "I know. Then I'll need your signed statement." I picked up the pen without hesitation. "You'll have it." As I finished signing, my phone buzzed on the desk. "David Lorne." I excused myself, stepped into the hallway, and answered. "Ward," he said immediately, his tone clipped. "I got word from Belvoir that you filed a case. Are you sure you want to do this? It's already done." He exhaled. "Listen to me. Once this goes on record, it's not just a family dispute anymore. If it goes public, it will destroy them." I stared out the window at the parade ground, the wind catching the flag as it whipped in sharp rhythm. "They destroyed my respect long ago," I said. "Respect's one thing," he said, "but this is blood." "So was service," I replied. "I bled for my country. I can survive this." He didn't argue, just sighed. "Fine. But be careful, Elise. There's more going on here than family drama. I think Rayfield's dirtier than we thought. That caught my attention." "What did you find?" "Preliminary trace shows their internal consultant payments route through a private shell company." "Guess who one of the consultants is?" My stomach dropped. "Don't say it." "Thomas Ward. He's been on their books for 2 years. I told you this leak had personal connections. Now we can prove it." The phone felt heavier in my hand. So my father's not just a name on a contract, he's part of the leak. Looks like it. We don't know if he's the one feeding intel, but he's in proximity to those who are. I leaned against the wall, pulse steady but rising beneath the surface. Send me what you have. Already did. Encrypted link in your inbox. Keep it off Rayfield's network. When I hung up, the irony struck me. My family had become the case file. What started as forged signatures and guilt trips had turned into espionage shadows and corporate leaks. Betrayal had two fronts now: blood and business. I walked back into the office. Lieutenant Commander Holbrook, one more thing. I need to include a supplemental file pertaining to the same incident. Indirectly, I said, it's connected. I handed her a flash drive labeled Consultant Ledger Rayfield Internal. She glanced at the name. Rayfield Analytics. Yes, I work there, and I believe they're linked to classified data leaks under DoD contract access. Her eyes sharpened. That's a serious accusation. I have verification logs, document trails, and a list of payments to civilian consultants, one of whom is my father. The silence between us thickened. Are you suggesting collusion? I'm suggesting pattern recognition, I said. The same pattern I was trained to detect in foreign operations. This time, it's domestic. She nodded slowly. Then we'll expand the inquiry. You've done the right thing. As she gathered the evidence, I felt an unexpected wave of calm. The kind that comes when you stop waiting for someone else to save what's already lost. By late afternoon, I was back at Rayfield. The building looked the same: clean glass, polished floors, but something in the air felt off. I moved through the hallways with the quiet precision of someone who'd spent years observing people before acting. At my desk, I logged in, checked my email, and found David's encrypted message waiting. Ward, the consultant ledger matches your father's contract. He's connected to two of the names we flagged. One of them's Keaton, my boss. The man who'd smiled too easily during the audit, who always seemed to know when questions were coming before I asked them. I opened the attachments. Transaction records, meeting notes, a hidden correspondence chain between Keaton and my father. Coded language disguised as logistics jargon: shipment verification, field brief conversions, source optimization. It was all there, the blueprint of a leak. I scrolled through until I reached the last message. Date stamped a week before the audit notice, from my father to Keaton. Ensure she doesn't suspect anything. She trusts you. The words hit harder than the slap had. I sat back, staring at the screen, pulse steady, mind electric. The betrayal was complete now, personal, professional, absolute. I thought of the years I'd spent earning trust the hard way, only to have it traded away for checks and excuses. I copied the entire thread to an encrypted archive, labeled it Ward Case, Internal Leak, and Fraud, and backed it to a secure drive. Then I powered down the laptop. Outside, the sun dipped low, painting the sky the color of rust. I walked to my car, the folder of evidence under my arm, and watched as the last light faded from the Rayfield building's mirrored glass. For the first time, I didn't feel angry. I felt clear. This wasn't just revenge anymore, it was a mission, and I knew exactly how to finish it. The first sign that the story had escaped control came on a Tuesday morning, 3 days after I filed my report. My phone started buzzing before dawn calls from unknown numbers, then texts from colleagues at Rayfield. The same phrase appeared in all of them. "You've seen the article, right?" I opened my laptop and found it within seconds. Headline in bold black letters: Family of Army Captain implicated in federal fraud investigation. Below it, a photo I hadn't seen in years, me in uniform standing between my parents at my graduation from Fort Bragg. Smiling, proud, the caption twisted that image into poison. Captain Elise Ward's family faces allegations of financial misconduct and misuse of Department of Defense credentials. The air left my lungs. My name wasn't in the subtext as the accused, but it was in the title, the headline everyone would remember. The article quoted sources close to the Ward family describing how a relative of the accused filed a complaint that triggered federal scrutiny. I didn't need to guess who'd spoken to the press. I knew. I scrolled further. A statement from Alyssa attached to her verified social media handle. "This has all been blown out of proportion. My sister has always been difficult. She didn't mean for things to go this far. Difficult. that word again. The same one people used for soldiers who didn't smile enough for women who refused to shrink. I stared at the screen until my vision blurred, then clicked open another tab. My social feeds were on fire hashtags with my name trending threads full of speculation. Army officer turns on her family. Fraud scandal in Virginia suburbs. Some comments defended me. Most didn't. By noon, Alyssa went live. The video auto-played on my phone before I could stop it. Her face filled the screen, mascara smeared tears streaking down perfectly filtered cheeks. "I don't even know what to say," she sobbed to her thousands of followers. My sister, my own sister, turned us in. She didn't have to do this publicly. She could have handled it privately, but she's always wanted to be the hero, always needed to prove she's better. Comments flooded the feed instantly. "Stay strong, girl. Some people forget blood is forever." Wow, how could she do that to her own family? I closed the video, disgust coiling in my chest. This was their counterattack, emotional manipulation disguised as heartbreak. My phone rang again. "David, you've seen it," he asked. "Every word." "Stay calm," he said. "The Office of Public Affairs is already drafting a clarification. But it's out there now. You can't put the lid back on." Then maybe it's time to stop hiding. Elise. But I'd already made up my mind. That afternoon, I drove straight to the base media office at Fort Belvoir. The press were already circling outside the gate, hungry for quotes. I parked behind the fence, walked into the briefing room, and faced the officers handling the crisis. "I want to make a statement," I said. One of them, a PR specialist, frowned. "That's not advisable, ma'am. You're not the accused party." "Exactly," I replied. "But the silence is letting them write the story for me." David arrived 20 minutes later, still on his phone. "You sure about this?" "You said honor still matters, right?" I asked. "Then let's remind them what it looks like." 30 minutes later, I stepped outside. The crowd of reporters shifted, cameras rising. I stood in front of the backdrop of the U.S. flag and the Department of Defense seal. My hands didn't shake. My voice came out steady, almost unnervingly calm. "My name is Captain Elise Ward, formerly U.S. Army Intelligence. The past week, multiple media outlets have reported that my family is under investigation for financial fraud. That information is true. What's missing is context." The murmurs quieted. I did not leak classified data. I did not commit any fraud, but members of my family used my federal credentials without authorization. I reported it because silence in the face of wrongdoing isn't loyalty, it's complicity. Cameras flashed. Someone shouted, "Do you feel guilty for turning in your own family?" I met their gaze. Guilt is what keeps good people quiet. I've carried enough of that already. Another voice cut in. "What do you say to those calling you ungrateful?" I let the pause hang before answering. "Honor isn't inherited," I said clearly. "It's earned." The words hung in the air, simple, unpolished, but heavy. For a heartbeat, even the wind seemed to stop. Then the questions exploded all at once. I didn't answer any of them. I just turned and walked back inside the storm of voices chasing behind me. Within hours, the clip hit every major platform. "Honor isn't inherited, it's earned." The quote became the headline, the meme, the rally cry. Veterans reposted it. Service members commented. Even civilians who'd never worn a uniform shared it, tagging it with phrases like #real integrity and #respect the code. By midnight, the video had 6 million views. The tide had turned. News anchors reframed the story, "Army Captain exposes fraud in her own family." Talk shows debated the courage to hold loved ones accountable. The same public that had condemned me 12 hours earlier now called me admirable. I didn't read the comments. I didn't need to. My inbox overflowed with messages, strangers thanking me, old teammates sending quiet salutes, one even writing, "You spoke for all of us who stayed silent." Alyssa's live stream stopped after that. Her apology post came 2 days later, buried under an avalanche of damage control. It started with, "My sister and I just see the world differently," and ended with, "I still love her." It was the kind of love that only surfaces when the public demands it. My parents stayed silent. The house in Arlington went dark online. No more photos, no more updates. The investigation moved forward quietly. I'd done my part. The rest wasn't mine to carry. That night, I sat by my window again, the city lights reflecting off the glass. For once, I didn't feel anger or guilt, just the faint, steady pulse of vindication. I whispered to myself, honor isn't inherited, it's earned. This time I wasn't reminding them, I was reminding me. The storm that followed wasn't made of bullets or fire, it was made of words. By the end of the week, my family's name was everywhere. News outlets ran follow-ups, podcasts dissected the Ward case, and social media turned every photo of us into a moral battlefield. At first, I tried not to look, but curiosity wins eventually even against discipline. On one thread, a stranger had written, her mom forged her identity for money. That's low. Another, that sister deserves an Oscar for those fake tears. And somewhere beneath all of it, Elise Ward did the right thing. I thought vindication would feel like victory. It didn't. It just felt quiet. By Thursday, the calls started again, but this time not from reporters, from my mother. Over and over, her number lit up the phone screen, ignored every time. On the 10th call, I finally answered. Elise, she said, voice trembling. You have to stop this. Stop what I asked flatly. The interviews, the statements, all of it. You're humiliating us. I didn't say anything that wasn't true. Please, she whispered. People are calling the neighbors, the church. Everyone's saying we're criminals. You are criminals, Mom. You forged a federal document. We didn't mean intent doesn't erase damage. There was a pause, just the sound of her breathing. Then the words that had always been her last weapon. Please, Elise. Fix this. I closed my eyes, my voice steady. I did, I said quietly, by telling the truth. For a long time she didn't speak. Then she hung up. That silence afterward was heavier than any argument. By the next day, the damage had spread. Alyssa's sponsorships started dropping one by one. Her beauty brand pulled out first, releasing a curt statement about ethical concerns. Then the wellness company canceled her ambassador deal. I saw the fallout through the same social feeds that once celebrated her comments full of schadenfreude disguised as moral outrage. Guess honesty isn't your best filter, huh? I didn't feel satisfaction, just inevitability. For years, she'd built an empire on image. Now the image had cracked. Meanwhile, at Rayfield, things turned surgical. The corporate email went out Friday morning, pending internal review, all external consultancy contracts are suspended. My father's name was among them. I didn't have to imagine his reaction. He'd built his pride on being the man in control. Having his authority stripped by an email must have gutted him. When David called that afternoon, his tone said everything. Rayfield's cleaning house, he said. Your father's under review. The DOD has flagged his consultancy payments for conflict of interest. Good, I said. Maybe now he'll understand consequences. You don't feel bad. Feeling bad is what kept me silent for 10 years. David paused. You know the irony here is that you're the only one who did everything by the book, and yet you're the one carrying the guilt. That's how conscience works, I said simply. He sighed. Well, I have some news that might change things. Cyber Command's building a new civilian task force. They want someone with your clearance level and operational background. I recommended you. I froze. You're serious? They're drafting your onboarding paperwork. You'd lead a small unit under Fort Meade jurisdiction. Full access federal clearance reinstated. For the first time in weeks, something like light broke through the static. After all this, especially after all this, they need people who don't flinch when the truth gets ugly. I let that sit for a moment. When do I start Monday? I hung up, and for a long while I just stared at the window. The city outside looked washed clean after the rain, streets glistening, headlights cutting lines through puddles. My reflection looked back at me, the faint mark on my cheek nearly gone, but the memory still burned under the skin. The next few days blurred into motion. I packed my things, cleared my desk at Rayfield, and signed my transition papers. As I walked out of that building for the last time, I felt no nostalgia, only release. The The same walls that once symbolized stability now felt like confinement. The night before my first day at DoD Cyber Command, another message arrived, this time from Alyssa. Just 3 words. "You happy now I didn't respond?" The following morning, I put on a dark blazer, tied my hair back, and drove to Fort Meade. The campus spread wide and precise rows of guarded gates, quiet efficiency. As I entered the main facility, the familiar security protocols felt like muscle memory. Badge scan, fingerprint clearance check. I'd come full circle, but this time I wasn't serving under someone else's shadow. David met me in the hallway. "Welcome back to the fight," he said with a small grin. "Feels different," I said. "It should. You're not following orders anymore, you're writing them." He handed me a new access badge. The nameplate read, "Captain Elise Ward, DoD Cyber Command CIV. I turned it over in my hand, feeling its weight. Not a uniform, but still a shield. Proof that integrity had value beyond medals or family approval. That night, back at my apartment, I stood by the window again, looking down at the streetlights below. I thought about my mother's voice, fragile pleading, my father's pride cracked in half, Alyssa's tears, real or not, streaming for an audience. They'd all built their world on appearances, and now they were standing in the rubble of it. Would I forgive them if they came crawling back? Maybe one day I'd find an answer, but not tonight. Tonight wasn't about forgiveness. It was about freedom. 3 months passed. Winter melted into the pale beginnings of spring, but the silence between me and my family stayed frozen. I thought it might last forever until the morning the base receptionist called. "Captain Ward, there's a man here asking to see you," she said. "Says he's your father." I felt my stomach tighten. "Send him to the visitor conference room," I said, already knowing this wasn't going to be a visit, it was going to be a reckoning. When I entered the small meeting room, he was standing by the window wearing the same navy coat he used to wear on Sundays when everything was still pretend normal. Time had aged him, but pride still sat heavy in his posture. He turned, and for a fleeting moment, I saw the man who used to salute flagpoles and make me believe honor was unbreakable. But that man was gone. "Elise," he said, voice low, like a command softened by need. "We need your help." I didn't sit. "Who's we?" "Your mother's sick," he said. "The stress. It's taken a toll. The mortgage company's threatening foreclosure again. They're talking about seizing the house." I kept my tone steady. "And you thought the best way to help her heal was to walk into my workplace after committing federal fraud." He flinched, just barely. "You don't understand. I was trying to protect this family." "By forging my name, I made a mistake," he said quickly. "We all did. But you've made your point. The world knows. Now it's time to put it behind us." "You want me to clean it up again?" I said quietly. "I want you to help your mother." I let the silence stretch until it hurt. "You forged my name for money. You'll live with that." His jaw locked. For the first time in my life, he looked smaller than I remembered. "You've changed," he said. "You talk like them now, like one of those bureaucrats who thinks family is paperwork." "No," I replied. "I talk like someone who finally stopped confusing guilt with loyalty." He took a slow breath, his tone shifting, searching for the authority that used to work on me. "You think you're the only one who sacrificed. You think you're better than us because you have a title. I think I'm better at telling the truth." He didn't answer. His shoulders sagged and the silence between us thickened like fog. When he finally spoke, it was barely above a whisper. "Your mother misses you. My mother misses control." His eyes met mine, the anger replaced by exhaustion. "You won't help. Not this time." He nodded once, almost imperceptibly, and walked toward the door. But before leaving, he said, "One day you'll realize there's no pride in being alone. And one day," I said softly, "you'll realize there's no honor in pretending you're right." When the door closed behind him, the room felt heavier, the kind of weight that only comes from finality. I stood there a moment longer, staring at the chair he hadn't used, and then went back to work. That evening, as I packed up, my phone buzzed, a message from Alyssa. The first one in months. I didn't mean it that night. I stared at the screen, the words hanging there like bait. The night she meant was the dinner, the laughter, the insult, the smirk that started everything. For a moment, I almost wanted to believe her. Almost. I typed back, "Neither did I until I said it." Her reply came quickly. "You really hate us, don't you?" I hesitated, then wrote, "No. I just finally love myself enough to stop lying for you." She didn't answer. The following days passed quietly. At the base, I buried myself in work. The Cyber Command project demanded precision and long hours, exactly what I needed. Every encrypted report, every traced leak, every intercepted signal was a reminder that truth, no matter how painful, always leaves a trail. But late at night, when the base went silent and the glow from the monitors cast pale light across the room, the memories crept back. My father's face when I refused him, my mother's trembling voice on the phone, Alyssa's messages that ended without replies. Pain doesn't vanish just because you're right. It lingers, reshaped into something colder. Still, I didn't regret a single word. One evening after a 12-hour shift, I walked out of the command building and paused at the edge of the parking lot. The wind carried the faint sound of marching drills from another wing, a steady, rhythmic echo that reminded me of simpler days. Days when orders made sense, when loyalty wasn't complicated. I tilted my head toward the darkening horizon. Somewhere beyond those clouds, my family was probably sitting in that same Arlington house, now half empty and haunted by consequences they thought would never come. And maybe, just maybe, a part of them understood that this was never about punishment. It was about boundaries. The next morning, an envelope arrived on my desk. Inside was a folded photo Alyssa, Mom, and Dad at a park bench. My father looked older, my mother frail, Alyssa expressionless. On the back, one line in my father's handwriting, "We're leaving Virginia." I held the photo for a long time before sliding it into my drawer. No anger, no relief, just quiet. Some endings don't come with closure, they come with distance. I looked out the window, watching the flags flutter along the base perimeter. The same wind that carried those colors forward now carried away what was left of the wards I used to know. Cold, painful, but clear. It was a quiet Monday morning when the call came through. I was reviewing an encryption audit at Cyber Command, surrounded by the soft hum of servers and the low murmur of analysts trading jargon like chess pieces. Routine, predictable, controlled. Then my phone buzzed with a name I hadn't seen since the investigation began. Lieutenant Colonel David Lorne Fort Bragg. "Captain Ward," he said when I answered, his voice steady but lighter than usual. "You've got 5 minutes for some good news." I leaned back in my chair, already bracing. "After the last few months, I'll believe that when I hear it." "Fair," he said with a small laugh. "Here it is. Your name's officially cleared. The DoD Ethics Review just closed the Rayfield case. Full exoneration." For a second, I didn't speak. The words didn't sink in all at once. They filtered through slow and surreal. "Say that again." Rayfield Analytics admitted guilt. "Corporate negligence, unauthorized data handling, conflict of interest violations. Your father's name came up as a consultant, but the legal department determined you had zero involvement. Your record's clean." I exhaled the tension I didn't realize I'd been holding, finally leaving my body. "It's over then." "On paper," David said. "But you and I both know it never really ends. The press will milk the story one more time before it dies out." "They can have it," I said quietly. "I'm done living in other people's noise." "Well," he continued, "if you're ready for something new, the Pentagon's opening a special oversight liaison role, someone to monitor contractor integrity and classified data compliance. Your name came up on the short list." "Oversight," I repeated. "You mean I'd be auditing the same systems that almost buried me?" "Exactly," David said. "You'd make sure no one else gets burned for doing the right thing." I smiled, just barely. "You recommended me, didn't you?" "Guilty as charged," he said, "but don't thank me yet. It's not an easy post. You'll be dealing with bureaucrats, generals, senators, contractors, all with agendas. I've been dealing with liars my whole life," I said. "I'll manage." He chuckled softly. "I thought you'd say that." When the call ended, I sat there in the humming quiet of the operations floor. Around me, monitors glowed blue in the dim light lines of code, reflecting in glass surfaces like constellations. I let the silence settle and thought about everything that had happened since that dinner. The insult, the laughter, the betrayal, the headlines. It all felt like another life, a bad dream that had burned away every illusion I'd clung to. Your name's cleared. 2 years ago, that sentence would have meant relief. Now it meant reclamation. I gathered my files, shut down my terminal, and walked out into the cold March air. The sky over Fort Meade was a dull silver, but the breeze carried something clean, almost sharp, a sense of renewal. For the first time in months, I wasn't running from anything. As I crossed the parking lot, my phone buzzed again, an email this time marked Confidential Pentagon Supervisory Appointment. The message was short and formal. Captain Elise Ward, you are hereby invited to assume the position of Senior Liaison Defense Oversight Division, Washington, D.C. Please confirm availability by Friday. I stopped walking and read it twice, then a third time. The words didn't just offer a job, they offered a kind of symmetry. The same system that had once turned its back on me was now asking me to protect it. I stood there for a long minute, listening to the hum of traffic and the distant thrum of jets overhead. A passing officer nodded at me in recognition, and I nodded back. Old habits. Old pride. That night, I drove down to the waterfront in Old Town Alexandria. It was cold, the kind of early spring chill that cuts through your jacket and makes the world feel sharper. I walked along the pier, the Potomac reflecting thin strips of city light. Somewhere across the water, Washington glowed a skyline of power history and quiet ghosts. I thought about my parents, whether they'd left Virginia yet, whether they'd watched the last broadcast about me, whether they even understood what I'd fought for. Probably not, but that no longer felt like my responsibility to fix. I leaned on the railing and let the wind brush against my face. My reflection on the water looked steady, unflinching. Maybe that was enough. My phone buzzed again, this time from David. Just 2 words. Congratulations, Captain. I typed back. It took losing a family to remember who I was trained to be. He replied a minute later. Sometimes you have to break formation to survive. I smiled faintly and put the phone away. The wind picked up, carrying the smell of rain and iron. Somewhere in the distance, a bell rang from one of the harbor boats. I looked up at the horizon, the faintest streak of dawn already cutting through the clouds. Tomorrow, I'd drive into D.C. and walk through to the Pentagon gates for the first time in years. Not as someone waiting for approval, but as someone who'd earned her place back. The title wouldn't make me whole. The clearance wouldn't erase the scars. But it would mean something simpler. I'd turned what they used to mock me for into purpose. Honor wasn't a medal after all. It was survival with integrity intact. The letter from the realtor arrived first. Plain white envelope, no return address, just the bold printed line. Property closing notice, Ward Residence, Arlington, VA. I read it twice, then once more, for the silence between the words. They were selling the house. The same house where everything had started, the laughter, the slap, the lies, the betrayal. It was all ending in a single transaction. I hadn't planned on going back. But closure isn't something you find in emails or legal documents. It's something you face. So on a gray Saturday morning, I drove south toward Arlington. The sky hung low, heavy with rain that hadn't decided whether to fall yet. When I pulled up to the curb, the house looked smaller than I remembered. The paint had peeled along the gutters, the porch light still flickered like it did years ago. The garden my mother used to fuss over had gone wild, roses tangled with weeds, ivy crawling over the fence. A for sale sign leaned slightly to one side, like even it had grown tired of waiting. I stood there for a moment, keys in hand, wondering if walking in would reopen every wound I'd worked so hard to close. Then I turned the handle. The door was unlocked. Inside, the air was still. Dust floated in soft spirals through the pale light leaking from the window blinds. Boxes lined the hallway, half sealed, half forgotten. The furniture was draped in white sheets, ghosts of a life that once pretended to be normal. My father was sitting in the living room, hunched forward on a folding chair. He didn't look up right away. When he finally did, his eyes met mine. No anger, no defiance this time, just weariness. "You came," he said. "To get what's mine," I said quietly. "There's not much left. That's not my problem anymore." He nodded slowly, as if he'd expected that answer. The silence stretched between us, thick and brittle. From the corner of my eye, I saw Alyssa leaning against the hallway wall, phone in hand, but not recording this time. Her face was pale, stripped of all the filters and confidence that once filled her screens. "You look tired," I said to her. "I am," she murmured. "It's been a lot. Consequences usually are." She didn't reply. I moved through the living room past the memories hanging like cobwebs, family portraits, trophies, the old flag in its glass frame. On the mantel sat a photo of me at my commissioning ceremony. I picked it up, brushed the dust off the glass, and looked at the younger version of myself, smiling, unbroken, full of belief that service meant respect. "You don't have to take that," my father said quietly. "I know," I replied, "but I earned it." I slipped the photo into my bag and walked toward the dining room. The table was bare now, no plates, no wine glasses, no laughter sharp enough to cut. Just a rectangular imprint on the floor where years of dinners had carved their weight into the wood. I placed a small envelope on it. "What's that?" Alyssa asked. "My last word," I said. My father frowned. Another statement. A boundary. I looked at both of them. My voice stayed calm, but the steel beneath it was unmistakable. "This isn't revenge. It's a boundary. You crossed it. Live with it." Alyssa's lips parted like she wanted to say something, but no sound came out. My father turned his gaze toward the floor, his hands tightening around the edge of the chair. I took one last look at the room, the same walls that had watched every silent humiliation, every argument swallowed for the sake of keeping peace. It no longer felt like a home. It felt like evidence. "The realtor said the sale closes next week," I said. "You'll get what's left after the debt clears. Don't contact me again." My father's voice was rough when he finally spoke. "Do you really hate us that much?" "No," I said simply. "If I did, I'd have left years ago. This isn't hate, it's release." I turned to leave, but his next words stopped me mid-step. "Your mother's not well," he said softly. "The doctors think it's her heart again." I didn't turn around. "She should take care of it this time." "She still prays for you," he said. I paused at the doorway. "Then tell her she can stop. I'm doing fine." Alyssa's voice broke the quiet. "Elise? Wait." I looked back. She took a step forward, hesitant, her phone forgotten on the counter. "Do you ever think about what we were before all this?" "No," I said, "because before all this, I was still the one holding everyone else together. You just didn't notice." Her eyes glistened, but I couldn't tell if it was regret or self-pity. Maybe both. "You're colder than I remember." "No," I said, my voice soft but final. "I'm clearer." I walked out before she could reply. Outside, the first drops of rain finally began to fall, slow, heavy, deliberate. I didn't run for cover. I let it hit me, soaking through my jacket, sliding down the bruise that still ached faintly beneath my skin. The driveway shimmered under the gray sky, and for a moment the world looked clean again. As I reached the car, I turned back once. Through the rain-blurred window, I could still see them, Alyssa standing still, my father sitting in silence beside the empty table. No shouting, no guilt. Just the hollow quiet of people who'd finally run out of excuses. I got into the car and started the engine. The wiper scraped across the windshield, clearing the water away for a moment before the next wave hit. The road stretched ahead, wet and gleaming like steel. In the rearview mirror, the house grew smaller, dissolving into the rain until it was nothing but a shadow. Some battles end in noise. Others end in quiet. This one ended with me driving away the sound of the storm, drowning everything I no longer needed to hear. Spring settled quietly over Arlington, and for the first time in years, my mornings had rhythm instead of orders. I rented a modest apartment near the Potomac, a glass-fronted building tucked between the old brick townhomes and the silent embassy offices. Every morning at 6, I ran. The path wound along the riverbank where the air still held a chill and the water caught fragments of the waking city. Joggers, cyclists, a few veterans in faded caps watching the sunrise. Each breath felt deliberate, like drawing in new oxygen after years of holding my lungs hostage to duty guilt and noise. Running had always been part of my training, but now it wasn't about endurance, it was about release. No cadence, no shouted commands, no mission brief echoing in my head. Just the soft rhythm of shoes against pavement and the steady pulse of my heart reminding me I was still alive, still moving forward. Some mornings, I stopped by the bench near Memorial Bridge where you could see the Washington Monument cut through the fog. I'd sit there, sweat cooling on my skin, and think about how peace didn't feel like victory. It felt like absence. Absence of noise. Absence of pretending. Absence of needing to explain myself to people who would never understand. My neighbors didn't know who I was, and I didn't offer. To them, I was just another quiet professional who left early and came home late, polite but distant. That anonymity was its own kind of therapy. After years of living under a microscope, family expectations, military command, public scrutiny, silence felt like sanctuary. One evening after work, as I sorted through mail on the kitchen counter, I found a small tan envelope with no return address. My name was written in block letters, Captain E. Ward. I slid it open with a key, half expecting another bureaucratic form. Instead, I unfolded a single sheet of paper creased from travel and faintly smudged with dirt. It was from Sergeant Mason Riley, one of the soldiers I'd served with in Syria. The letter was brief, written in the same blunt tone he used in every debrief. "Ma'am heard what happened. The press never gets it right. Just wanted to say you saved us once. Now you've saved yourself. Proud of you." I read it twice, my throat tightening. The last time I'd seen Riley, he was being loaded into a medevac after the convoy ambush near Aleppo. I'd pulled him from the wreck myself. For months afterward, I'd wondered if he made it. Now, years later, he was the one reminding me what survival really meant. I set the letter down and stared out the window. The city lights flickered against the glass, faint reflections dancing across the river. The water looked darker at night, but calmer too, like it had finally learned to carry the weight of what it held without breaking. Maybe I was learning the same thing. I began keeping a notebook, a habit I'd dropped after leaving the service. Not mission logs this time, just fragments of thought. Lines like, "Real love doesn't demand proof. Real respect doesn't need permission." Words that came during runs in traffic over morning coffee. I didn't write about my family anymore. They'd become shadows, part of the past, but not my story's center. The house in Arlington had sold 2 weeks earlier. The realtor confirmed it was bought by a retired couple from Maine. When I drove by one afternoon, the yard was clean, the porch light fixed, and the for sale sign gone. The new owners had already replaced the door. That felt right. Some places needed new beginnings untainted by ghosts. My work at the Pentagon filled the days. It wasn't glamorous, but it mattered, building oversight frameworks, reviewing contractor data, making sure no one else's loyalty would be weaponized against them. I liked the structure, the quiet accountability of it. And sometimes late at night in the echoing hallways, I caught glimpses of my younger self reflected in the glass, focused, unyielding, unafraid. One afternoon, I found myself walking past the wall, the Vietnam Veterans Memorial. I hadn't planned to stop, but my feet carried me there. I ran my fingers along the engraved names, thinking about how many stories ended in silence, how many families never understood what their sons or daughters had given. How many, like mine, mistook sacrifice for pride and pride for love? I thought about my father's words before I left the house that last time. "One day you'll realize there's no pride in being alone." He was wrong, but only partly. Solitude isn't pride, it's clarity. It's the space where you learn to stop apologizing for your survival. As I stood there, a breeze lifted off the river, warm and steady. Somewhere behind me, a man played taps on a trumpet. The notes were faint, nearly swallowed by the wind, but they found me anyway, threading through the noise of the city straight into the quiet place I'd built inside myself. I walked home slowly that evening, the sky streaked in pink and copper. In the apartment, I made tea, opened Riley's letter again, and slipped it into my journal between 2 blank pages. "You saved us once. Now you've saved yourself." I smiled, a real one this time. No bitterness, no defiance. Just gratitude for the message, for the distance, for the peace that came, not from forgiveness, but from release. Before bed, I stood by the window one last time, the river glowing under the moonlight. I whispered to the reflection staring back at me, "Real love doesn't demand proof. Real respect doesn't need permission." The city was silent, the water kept moving, and for the first time in years, I finally let go. It happened quietly, the way all the important things in my life seemed to. No fanfare, No headlines, just a white envelope from the Department of the Army with my name printed in block type and the seal of the Pentagon pressed into the corner. The date read May 6th, 2024. I held it for a long moment before opening it, the weight of it strangely heavier than paper should be. Inside was a single-letter formal measured every word polished by bureaucracy. Captain Elise Ward, you are hereby awarded the Bronze Star Medal for meritorious achievement in connection with military operations against an armed enemy of the United States Syria 2020. My breath caught for a second. The medal that never came. The one they'd joked about. The one I'd long ago stopped expecting. I stared at the ink until the words blurred slightly, then set the letter down beside the half-empty mug of coffee on my desk. Outside, the morning sun slanted across the Potomac gold, cutting through the mist. A message from Lieutenant Colonel David Lorne followed an hour later. Got the news from HQ. About time they fixed that oversight. Ceremony's small private. You should come, I typed back. Do I have a choice? You earned it, Ward, he replied. Don't downplay it this time. The ceremony took place 3 days later in a small hall at the Pentagon, a far cry from the grand promotions and change of command events that usually filled the building. Maybe a dozen people were there, a few officers from Fort Bragg, a handful of colleagues from Cyber Command, and David standing at the edge of the room in his dress uniform, arms folded, expression caught somewhere between pride and relief. The colonel presenting the medal spoke briefly words I'd heard 100 times at other ceremonies but never imagined attached to me. For exceptional service under conditions of significant risk. For leadership composure and selflessness in the face of danger. His voice echoed slightly off the sterile walls. When he pinned the medal onto my uniform, I felt the cool weight of it against my chest. Not heavy measured. Like a balance finally restored. Applause followed polite and brief. David stepped forward, shook my hand. So, he said with a small grin, how does it feel to finally have proof? I smiled faintly. Strange. Peaceful. That's new for you. Yeah, I said. It is. We stepped aside as the next officer was called up for recognition. The ceremony moved on, but my focus drifted. I looked down at the medal resting against the fabric bronze, star-shaped shining under the overhead lights, a symbol that meant everything and nothing at once. For years, my family had measured worth and visibility in things that could be posted, displayed, envied. Medals, money, attention. But this piece of metal didn't prove anything they would have understood. It didn't erase the betrayal or rewrite the dinners filled with laughter at my expense. What it did was simple. It reminded me that what I did in silence still mattered, that sometimes the reward wasn't recognition. It was survival with integrity intact. After the ceremony, David and I walked outside into the courtyard. The late spring air was warm, the kind that hinted at summer, but still carried the cool memory of winter mornings. The flags along the walkway fluttered in rhythm, each one casting a long shadow across the marble path. You know. David said, hands in his pockets, when I first put your name in for this medal back in 2020, I didn't think it would take 4 years. I glanced at him. Neither did I. You were the one who pulled Riley out of that convoy. You saved 2 lives that day. And lost 3 others, I said quietly. That's war, he replied. We never get a perfect score. But you did your duty. The rest of it, the politics, the delays, the noise, that's the part we live with. I looked up at the sky, pale and cloudless. I used to think medals were about validation, I said. Proof that it all meant something. And now, I think the real proof is still being here. He nodded slowly. Well, for what it's worth, it suits you. I laughed softly. The medal or survival, both. A faint breeze brushed past, carrying the scent of magnolia and distant jet fuel. I closed my eyes for a moment and let it wash over me, the hum of traffic, the murmur of voices, the sound of a flag snapping in the wind. It all felt so ordinary, and maybe that was the point. Later that night, back in my apartment, I placed the medal on my desk beside Riley's letter. The two sat there together, the words and the medal, the unseen and the visible. Proof of 2 versions of the same thing. I poured a glass of water, sat by the window, and looked out at the city lights stretching toward the horizon. The same skyline I'd once watched through anger and exhaustion now looked softer, quieter. I touched the metal lightly, tracing its edges with my fingertips. "So this is the metal they mocked me for," I whispered. No bitterness, no triumph, just acceptance. It didn't belong to them. It never had. It belonged to the part of me that had refused to give up when everyone else turned away. The soldier, the survivor, the woman who had finally learned that honor wasn't something you were given. It was something you carried quietly, even when no one clapped. I set the metal down, turned off the lamp, and let the room go dark. The city beyond my window pulsed with faint light, steady as a heartbeat. Somewhere in that rhythm, I finally found closure. Morning sunlight filtered through the blinds, painting narrow bands of gold across the bedroom floor. The uniform hung on the door, pressed and spotless, the bronze star pinned neatly above the pocket. I hadn't worn it since the ceremony, but today this morning I felt the quiet pull to see what peace looked like reflected back at me. I stood in front of the mirror, fastening each button, smoothing the fabric flat with careful hands. The woman staring back wasn't the same officer who'd left Fort Bragg 4 years ago, or the one who'd sat at that dinner table trying to swallow humiliation with wine. Her shoulders were straighter now, her eyes clear steady. Not cold, just certain. The light from the window caught the edges of the metal, scattering faint reflections across the wall like tiny fragments of the past. I touched it lightly. "So this is what closure looks like," I whispered. On the dresser, a single frame held the only photo I'd kept, a shot of my old unit taken weeks before the Syria mission. Sand, smiles, sunburns, exhaustion. I looked at their faces and thought of Riley's letter, of David's quiet pride during the ceremony, of how survival had 1,000 unseen forms. I poured coffee, opened the balcony door, and stepped into the soft May air. The river below shimmered faintly, the city waking in calm, measured rhythm. I thought about how far I'd come from chaos to quiet, from guilt to boundaries. Peace didn't come with applause. It arrived like this, slow and steady, in the mornings you finally stop waiting for someone else to understand. My phone buzzed on the counter. I walked back inside and glanced at the screen. The name stopped me cold for a second. Mom. The message preview was short. I watched the ceremony. "I'm proud of you." I stood there, phone in hand, heart still but not hardened. I reread the words once, twice. There was no bitterness left, only a kind of distant empathy, the way you might feel for someone who finally realized the cost of their silence too late. I set the phone down. The message stayed open on the screen, glowing faintly in the morning light. I thought about replying something polite, neutral, maybe "thank you," but it would pull me back into a loop I'd already escaped. Some apologies come too late to rebuild anything. Some recognition arrives only when you no longer need it. I closed the message and pressed delete. The screen went dark. "Some messages," I murmured, "don't need replies." I turned back toward the mirror. The metal caught the light again, a flash of bronze and gold that flickered, then faded. It didn't feel like vindication. It felt like release. Everything that had once been about proving them wrong had dissolved into something quieter, proving to myself that walking away wasn't weakness, it was survival. Later that afternoon, I walked along the river path again. The air was warm, the kind of May heat that sticks to your skin, the smell of honeysuckle rising from the grass. A group of ROTC cadets jogged past, their cadence echoing down the path. For a moment, I smiled. That rhythm, that discipline, that drive, it had once been my heartbeat. I stopped at the bench overlooking the Potomac and sat, hands folded. Across the river, the Washington Monument stood sharp against the sky, and behind it, the city buzzed, unaware, uncaring, alive. I thought of all the medals pinned on uniforms across history. How many had been earned quietly? How many stories had been buried beneath families that never asked to understand? My peace wasn't in forgiveness, it was in the distance between what hurt me and what I'd become. I didn't need to hate them anymore. I didn't even need them to know they were wrong. The truth had already done its work. Somewhere across the river, the faint hum of helicopters rolled through the air. Reflex made me glance up, tracking their movement until they disappeared behind the skyline. It didn't bring memories anymore, just understanding. Every sound, every scar, every silence, each one was part of the same story that had finally come full circle. When I got home, I hung the uniform back in the closet. Not as armor, not as proof, just as something I'd carried and could now set down. The metal stayed pinned, shining faintly in the dim light. I closed the door softly. In the living room, I opened my notebook to the last page and wrote one final line beneath all the fragments of thought collected over the past year. Peace is when you stop needing anyone else to clap for your survival. I set the pen down, exhaled, and let the quiet fill the room. Outside, the city lights began to glow, reflected in the rippling water below my balcony. My story wasn't one of revenge anymore, it was one of reclamation. I'd spent years serving my country and months fighting for my name. But tonight, I was simply Elise Ward, a woman who'd learned that honor is not inherited, forgiveness is not owed, and freedom sometimes looks like silence. I poured a glass of wine, raised it toward the window, and whispered to the city that had both broken and rebuilt me. If you've ever had to earn your family's respect the hard way, I said, softly. Voice steady and sure. Tell me where you're listening from. The house sold in June. I didn't go back for the closing. The realtor handled everything. One afternoon, she emailed the final paperwork, a short message with the subject line, "Settlement complete. Property transferred." Just like that, the last trace of what used to be home was gone. No more porch light flickering over memories, no more ghosts of Sunday dinners, no more weight tied to a street name that once defined my guilt. A week later, I heard Alyssa had moved to Florida. A mutual acquaintance sent me a link to her new social account pictures of beaches, palm trees, motivational captions about healing. She looked happy, or at least like she was trying to be. I didn't scroll long. Whatever she was building now was hers to keep. I thought about my parents sometimes, mostly in quiet flashes. The way my father used to hum when reading the paper, the smell of my mother's coffee at dawn, the human things, not the wounds. They'd settled somewhere smaller, a retirement town near Virginia Beach, according to a former neighbor. I didn't call. I didn't send an address. Some distances exist to protect everyone involved. My life had folded into simplicity. I bought a small house outside Quantico, a one-story brick place with tall oaks shading the driveway and a backyard that caught the evening light just right. No luxury, no echoes of the past. Just enough space for peace. Mornings started with coffee and the faint rumble of Marine training drills from miles away. Some nights I'd hear the cadence calls drifting on the wind and feel something like belonging again. The house came with creaky floors and a broken porch light, small imperfections that somehow made it mine. I fixed them myself, slowly, deliberately turning the process into quiet rituals. Each repair, each nail, each coat of paint felt like reclaiming the control I'd lost over my own life for so long. The neighbors didn't ask questions. To them, I was just Elise, the woman who works for defense. They waved when I passed, and that was enough. Inside the walls were bare except for two things, a framed American flag folded in glass and the bronze star mounted above my desk. Sometimes I caught the metal's reflection in the window and smiled, not out of pride, but gratitude. Not everyone gets to rebuild from nothing. On the first Sunday in July, I visited Fort Belvoir for a veterans gathering. David was there still wearing that same calm authority that made soldiers listen. He greeted me with a grin. "You look rested," he said. "That's new," I replied. We stood by the memorial wall for a while, not talking much. The air was heavy with humidity, and somewhere nearby a bugle played faintly. I told him about Quantico, about the quiet, about learning how to just be still. He listened, hands folded behind his back. "You ever think about going back?" he asked finally. "To the field?" He nodded. "No," I said. "I think I've fought enough battles." He gave a small nod, the kind only another soldier understands, the kind that says you've earned your peace. Before we parted, he handed me a coin the kind commanders give for service. "Just in case you ever forget who you are," he said. "I won't," I told him. That night, I placed the coin beside my medal and stared at them both in the low light. Two symbols from two very different wars, one against enemies, one against family. Both had cost me something. Both had given me something back. I poured a cup of tea and stepped out onto the porch. The sky over Quantico was streaked with faint traces of pink and gold. The air smelled like wet pine and possibility. I thought about everything that had led here, the dinners, the fights, the humiliation, the exposure, the aftermath. It all seemed distant now, like a storm I'd watched from behind reinforced glass. What used to feel like anger had turned into understanding. Not forgiveness, not exactly, but clarity. Every person I'd lost had shown me something about what to keep. The quiet hum of a passing car broke my thoughts. I looked at my reflection in the window, the uniform folded neatly on the chair, inside my face, softer, steadier. Every battle I fought taught me tactics, I whispered. This one taught me boundaries. The words felt right, simple, clean earned. Inside, I turned off the lights and walked to the mirror in the hallway. For a long moment, I just looked. The faint reflection of the metal glimmered against the glass, catching the smallest trace of light from the street. I raised my hand in a slow, precise salute. Not for the past, not for the pain, but for survival. For the version of me that refused to disappear even when everything else fell apart. The house was silent, but not empty. It breathed with the same quiet rhythm I'd finally found in myself. I lowered my hand, smiled faintly, and whispered, "At ease." Outside, a storm gathered far off the coast, just a low rumble of thunder rolling toward Virginia Beach. I listened for a moment, then closed the window. It wasn't my storm to face anymore. The camera fades in slowly. The light is soft warm, like late afternoon sun cutting through the blinds of a quiet Arlington apartment. No music yet, just the faint hum of city noise in the distance. Then a voice. Calm, controlled, steady. My voice. Honor is not a medal I begin. It's what you do when no one claps. The camera holds on my reflection in the window, the faint outline of the medal glinting beside the folded flag. My voice grows quieter, almost a whisper, meant for those who understand the weight behind the words. People think the hardest battles happen out there beyond the wire under fire, but sometimes they happen at home around a dinner table between the people who are supposed to know you best. I take a slow breath, eyes fixed on the city skyline beyond the glass. They tell you to be strong, to protect, to serve. And when you do, when you come back, carrying the silence of all the things you can't explain, they mock what they don't understand. They mistake quiet for weakness, service for pride, discipline for distance. The screen cuts to flashes of memory's slow cinematic sequences. The table, the wine, the laughter that sliced deeper than words. Then the empty street headlights reflecting on wet asphalt and me behind the wheel alone. That night when my family laughed, I continue. Something broke that wasn't meant to break. It wasn't my patience. It was the illusion that love meant sacrifice without limits. I learned the hardest truth of all, that sometimes the people you protect will never know what it costs you. I turn from the window, the camera shifting focus to the metal in my hand. The bronze catches the light, small, simple, heavy. This, I say softly, took 4 years to arrive. But what it represents can't be pinned to a uniform. It belongs to every soldier who came home to silence, to every woman who served in shadows and had to prove her worth twice, once to her command and once to her own family. The background sound builds slowly, the faint rhythmic tap of a snare drum, distant but deliberate, like footsteps echoing in an empty hallway. If you've ever been mocked for your service, I say, voice growing stronger, or for your silence, you're not alone. You don't need applause to have honor. You don't need recognition to have worth. The screen fades to an image of the Potomac at dawn, the sunlight spilling across the water. When I came home, I thought peace would mean forgiveness, I say. But peace isn't always kind. Sometimes it's just the quiet you find after you stop explaining yourself. My tone softens again, gentler now, carrying the fatigue and grace of someone who's seen too much and still chooses compassion. Every battle I fought taught me tactics, but this one, this fight for my own dignity, taught me boundaries. And maybe that's the kind of honor that really matters. Not medals, not ceremonies, just the courage to say, this is where I end, and where your expectations no longer define me. The camera pans slowly across my apartment, the metal, the letter from Sergeant Riley, the coffee mug, the open notebook. Life stripped to essentials. Nothing performative, nothing wasted. To anyone listening, I continue. Maybe your war didn't happen in uniform. Maybe it happened in your home, your job, your silence. But if you had to fight for your self-respect, then you already understand. I step closer to the lens eyes steady. Tell me where you're listening from. Drop your city, your local time. Because somewhere out there, someone else is sitting in that same quiet, wondering if their story matters. The music fades into a single snare hit sharp and echoing like the crack of a salute. Let's remind the world, I say the last words deliberate, unwavering, that honor still matters. The shot lingers a still frame of the metal in sunlight, my hand resting beside it, steady and calm. The drum fades into silence. The screen cuts to black. Then, in white text, Captain Elise Ward, U.S. Army Intelligence. 12 years served. One night changed everything. The screen fades back in slowly after the black title card. The background this time isn't her apartment, it's the Pentagon courtyard at sunset. The camera holds on Captain Elise Ward standing near the fountain, still in her dress uniform, the bronze star catching the dying light. She's not addressing a superior or a journalist now. She's speaking directly to the camera, to the audience, her tone steady, low, and clear. When I joined the Army, I thought honor was something you earned once, she says, voice measured. You train, you serve, you survive, you get recognized. But I learned that honor isn't a rank or a medal. It's a choice you make again and again, especially when no one's watching. She glances upward, the reflection of the flag rippling in the water beside her. When they laughed at me that night when my own family mocked the one thing I had devoted my life to, I didn't react out of anger. I reacted out of clarity. Because at some point you stop asking people to understand what they're not capable of valuing. Her hands rest lightly behind her back, posture poised but human. Some of you watching this know what that feels like. Maybe it wasn't your uniform they mocked. Maybe it was your dreams, your silence, the boundaries you finally set after a lifetime of being the dependable one. Maybe you were told you owed them even when they'd taken more than they ever gave. She takes a breath, her eyes meeting the lens with quiet defiance. But here's the truth. They don't teach in any manual service. Doesn't end when you leave the battlefield. It continues every time you protect your own peace. Every time you say no to the guilt that used to define you. Every time you choose integrity over approval. The snare drum begins again, softer this time, like the echo of a heartbeat under the sound of wind. Behind her, the last light fades from the sky. You can rebuild after betrayal. She continues, her tone gentler now. You can walk away from people you love and still wish them peace. You can forgive without returning to the fire. And when you do, you'll learn something I didn't understand until I lost everything. Boundaries are not walls. They're fences that keep respect in and manipulation out. A close-up, the metal resting against her chest. This metal means less to me than the moment I finally looked in the mirror and recognized myself again. For years, I thought I had to keep proving I belonged to the Army, to my family, to anyone who doubted what a woman in uniform was capable of. But you can't make people see what they've decided to stay blind to. You can only live in a way that makes their blindness irrelevant. The music swells faintly. Cut to archival clips: Elise walking across the Potomac Bridge at dawn, then training cadets on the shooting range, then standing at the Pentagon corridor, file in hand. Her voice overlays the images. It took me 12 years to understand that honor is quiet. It doesn't demand the room's attention. It just keeps showing up day after day, choice after choice. She pauses, her tone lowering to a whisper. So if you're listening right now, if you've ever been mocked for standing your ground, for keeping your silence, for choosing decency in a world that rewards deceit, then this message is for you. The camera slowly zooms in her gaze, unwavering. Drop your city. Drop your local time. Tell me where you're listening from, because you are not invisible. Not anymore. The beat fades, replaced by ambient sound, distant traffic, a bird cutting through the evening air. She looks out across the courtyard. When I stood in that dining room years ago, I thought silence was surrender. But now, I know it's power. It's the space you create between who you were told to be and who you decide to become. The shot cuts briefly to her reflection in the fountain, distorted by ripples, yet unmistakably composed. I used to think honor was about recognition, she says. But honor isn't loud. It's quiet resilience. It's every time you do the right thing knowing no one's going to thank you for it. It's every time you stand up for your principles, even when it costs you family, friends, or comfort. The snare picks up once more, slower now, like footsteps fading into distance. Elise steps closer to the camera voice, steady but softer. Maybe you've carried burdens no one saw. Maybe you've held your line when it would have been easier to give in. Maybe your story didn't end with applause, but that doesn't mean it didn't matter. She lets a faint, knowing smile cross her lips. I didn't tell my story to be pitied. I told it so someone else out there, maybe you can stop thinking you're weak for drawing a line. The frame widens, revealing the flag reflected in the water. You can start again, she says. Not because the world gave you permission, but because you finally gave yourself the right to. The snare fades to silence. The screen dips into soft black for a few seconds. Then, the next sequence begins the final reflection. The screen fades back from black. The setting has changed. It's dusk again, but this time the scene is smaller, more intimate. Elise standing on the back porch of her Quantico home. The yard glows faintly under amber light, cicadas hum in the distance, and the Potomac breeze brushes through the trees. She's holding a mug, hair pulled back, her uniform folded neatly on a chair beside her. The tone is no longer confession or defense. It's peace distilled. Her voice enters softly, steady, and contemplative. When I first put on the uniform, she says, I thought honor meant giving everything you had, time, loyalty, even your silence to something bigger than yourself. But over time, I realized that sometimes the something bigger isn't a flag or an institution. It's your own integrity. She takes a slow sip, eyes fixed on the horizon. Integrity is what you keep when everything else is stripped away. And sometimes it takes losing everything, even family, to remember what was truly yours to begin with. The camera pans across her yard, the flag folded in a glass case, the bronze star on the windowsill, the faint glimmer of twilight on the river. I get messages now, she continues, from people who've watched this story. Soldiers, nurses, teachers, parents, all of them saying the same thing. I thought I was the only one. But you're not. You're never the only one. Somewhere, someone else has sat through a dinner where every word cut deeper than any battle wound. Somewhere, someone else has been told they weren't enough by the people they'd die to protect. Her eyes soften, the voice gaining warmth and resonance. Maybe you're one of them. Maybe you're sitting in a quiet room right now thinking about all the times you kept the peace just to be loved. Maybe you've spent years trying to earn respect that was never yours to beg for. But hear me clearly, you don't have to explain your worth to anyone who benefits from misunderstanding it. The camera slowly moves closer as she speaks, framing her face in soft half-light. Honor is not a medal. It's not applause. It's not even forgiveness. It's the strength to stand by your own truth, even when it leaves you standing alone. She pauses, the air still for a moment. I used to think I had to fix everything, that love meant carrying everyone else's weight until my knees gave out. But now I understand that love can also mean letting people face the consequences of what they've done. That respect isn't given by blood, it's earned by behavior. And that boundaries aren't cruelty, they're the proof that you've finally learned to protect yourself the way you once protected everyone else. The camera cuts to her reflection in the sliding glass door, her silhouette against the golden light, faint but resolute. I've been asked if I regret cutting ties, she says, if I miss them. The truth is, I miss what I thought we were. I miss the version of family that existed only in my imagination. But I don't miss who they became when they showed me what my silence was worth to them. A long pause. And if you've ever had to make that kind of choice to walk away from people who called it betrayal when it was really survival, I see you. The snare drum begins again, low and distant, like a heartbeat at rest. You can build something new, she says. It won't look like the past, it won't sound like forgiveness, but it'll be real, it'll be yours, and it'll be peaceful. The scene shifts. Elise walking along the river at night, streetlights reflected in the water. Her footsteps match the faint rhythm of the drum. Every story like mine she narrates isn't about revenge, it's about clarity, about learning that justice doesn't always look like punishment. Sometimes it looks like distance. Sometimes it's the silence that follows the storm. She stops at the same bench from before the one near Memorial Bridge and sits. The metal glimmers faintly under the dim light as she sets it beside her. "They mocked me for not having a medal," she says, voice barely above a whisper. "They didn't know I already had something more valuable, the peace that comes when you stop living for other people's applause." The shot lingers. A breeze ripples across the river. She looks straight into the camera now, a faint smile forming, not prideful, just sure. To everyone who's carried a story like mine, she says, drop your city. Drop your local time. Because honor doesn't fade when the laughter stops. It grows in the quiet after. It grows in every person who refuses to let mockery define their worth. The snare fades to silence again, leaving only the faint hum of night. Elise stands, tucks the medal back into her pocket, and turns toward the camera one last time. Her expression is calm, resolved a soldier's farewell without the ceremony. "This story wasn't about pain," she says quietly. "It was about reclamation. About standing in your truth even when it costs you everything familiar. Because when the noise dies down and the lights fade, the only thing left, the only thing that ever mattered, is how you carried yourself when no one clapped." The final line lands slow, deliberate. That's honor, and it still matters. She lifts her hand in a crisp salute toward the horizon, the light catching the faint outline of her uniform sleeve, and holds it there for a long, silent moment. The camera widens to capture her silhouette, framed by the water and the fading light. The music swells once, then cuts completely, leaving her figure still against the calm. On-screen text appears, Captain Elise Ward, U.S. Army Intelligence. Chapter 12 Years Served. One night changed everything. A final voiceover, soft and direct, almost like a whisper through the speakers. "If you've ever had to earn your family's respect the hard way, tell me where you're listening from." Fade to black.